What is a carpenter? In my own particular lifetime, dating back in 2022, I actively took part in building a Hindu temple. The Sri Murugan, which is a Hindu temple in the Cross Iron region of my particular city. Within said building of temples, what might you be as an individual? A trades worker, a person who builds, which by building the world, you actively give a place for individuals to pursue living their lives and bettering their lives within the establishments you help build. Jesus himself was a carpenter. And being a carpenter, what might Jesus himself have done in the past as a person building the world? He ran the largest construction site, you could say, metaphorically, by building faith. He built one of the largest houses or booths that which all of human civilization would ever see going forward. And in being the carpenter, an individual that builds said world, what might a carpenter do? He would work with wood. And in Jesus' time, being an individual that worked with wood, and in order to say, afford being able to live, which back in those days, in order to live or to pray, was a cost of silver. If Jesus, being an individual working with wood, may he have himself been given contract to build crosses, which in his work as the best of the best, as a carpenter, he develops strength. Strength able to carry said cross. And in his weakest moment, beyond the time of his lashings, and having the crown of thorns placed upon his head, Jesus carried his cross and was toured around Jerusalem to be mocked. And yet he stood under that cross at the best of his best abilities. In the best of his best abilities, we may shift away from the pain, and in the best of his abilities, we may find the connection. When reading a book, as an individual, specifically who engages in reading a book, you find a protagonist and an antagonist. Which, when you read a book, you essentially sympathize, with said individual, whichever character you specifically relate or identify to, no matter the story. So when reading the Bible, why does no one read it from the point of Jesus? We simply see it from the point of ourselves, because we are the ones reading it. And as the ones reading it, we have our own internal thought, creating conflict within said pre-written word. But within said pre-written word, in your mind, you create then your own individual moral compass, according to what you choose to say. You can actively identify in life. At the moment at which Christ arrives upon the mound, he is then crucified. Even beyond being crucified, he demands, after hours, he demands a drink of water, which a Roman soldier uses a spear and places it upon a sponge. And in this sponge, he then douses a liquid and brings the sponge up to the mouth of Christ. And to the mouth of Christ, at this particular point, he feeds him vinegar, which, already being completely lacerated at that particular point, at the least of the extent of the punishment, receiving said vinegar to lacerated wounds, you can simply just imagine the sensation that might have felt like. At the beginning of Jesus' life, he is met by 3 kings. At the end of his life, he dies by 2 criminals, a murderer and a thief, crucified beside him. At each particular resurrection and death of Christ, at the beginning and at the end, we see ultimately one. At the beginning, he is visited by 3. At his death, he dies by 2. And in his resurrection, he comes back as 1. And in being 1, you now see his new taking of life, which we do not speak of in said Bible. In understanding where the testaments are essentially played, when there is 2 books written by one author, what would you expect? A trilogy. There is the Old Testament, which in the Old Testament, Christ is not, or Jesus specifically, is not spoken of within the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we see the story of Jesus achieving Christ. In the Third Testament, we see a new book. I invite you to be the individual that writes said book. And upon finding the teachings of putting together said book, you may find where ultimately the resurrection of Christ, where this resurrection process takes place. If Christ died for all, he relives in all. It simply is if the individual seeks to find God within themselves. By finding the higher self, your higher power, the Word. The moment you find the Word of influencing your life, affecting your life, you are actively placed with a decision, a judgment. Do you keep speaking and thinking and acting in the way you have, resulting in your current life? Or do you experience a resurrection where Christ enters your being? In the resurrection of Christ, if Christ died for the world's sins, and now the world is full of sin, where might said resurrection of Christ take place? In a world full of individuals, full of sin individually, which, if he died for all, he will live in all the moment you decide to simply invite the Word into your life. Whether you choose to believe or whether you know. The two moralities of said story you are given free will, and ultimately you are the deciding factor in the resurrection within yourself. Thank you.